Hello, everyone, and welcome to Growth Play's three-part series, Growth Reimagined, Making Smart Investments in 2020 and Beyond. I'm Tasneem Khokha, and I'm here with my colleague, Deb Baker, and we couldn't be more excited to spend some time with you today and over the next 3 weeks to think about how firms can make smart decisions about investing in growth during this time of incredible upheaval and uncertainty. We're going to dive right into today's session on growth strategy in just a moment. But first, I want to give you a quick overview of what you can expect. We'll be hosting a total of 3 30-minute sessions. This week focused on strategy. Next week focused on building a sales playbook for your teams. And on August 20th, focused on investing in individual business developers. For those who have a few minutes longer after our presentation each week, we'll stay on the line and share the results of our Pulse survey that you filled out and answer any questions you may have. With that, I'm going to turn it over to my lovely colleague, Deb Baker, who will lead today's presentation. Deb, it's all yours.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. We're so thrilled to have you all here today. The focus of today's session, as Taz said, is on growth strategy. And what we hope you'll get out of the next 29 minutes is a point of view on how to think about growth from a strategic level. We want to give you some tools so that you can engage in internal conversations and actually assess your own firm's growth readiness. And I know we have a wide breadth of participants on today's call. For those of you who already have a really clear growth strategy and who already know exactly what your priorities are, we're going to give you some recommendations around where and how you might want to prioritize your investments through the rest of the year and as we start to look to 2021 and beyond. For context setting, we thought a great place to start would just be to think about where we are today in this latest time of upheaval and how that compares to what we learned 10 years ago during the financial crisis. And for many of you on this call who were in a situation like I was, we know what a slog that was. It looked in how the financial crisis unfolded for law firms looked a little bit different than what happened now, but there were some key lessons that came out of it. One of the key lessons, at least from my perspective, was the fact that we learned in 2008 that there was a lot of fat that we could cut, and that bottom line, focusing on bottom line revenue, bottom line savings and finding places to cut was a really, really good place to start. And for many, many firms, that was enough. And folks were able to emerge that way. That was actually a really good thing for the profession, for how we run our businesses. And so many firms, what we've seen over the last 12 years is that they've continued that relentless focus on the bottom line. The challenge is that as we now look at the uncertainty we're in now, and a lot of unknowns about what's going to happen over the next year or so and the impact of this year, if we've already done all the work at cutting bottom line fundamentals, we've got to start looking at somewhere else in terms of how are we going to maintain our growth. And so that's the purpose of today, is to really talk about that top line revenue growth. Tez, before we keep going, we had a really interesting conversation yesterday in terms of our experiences about what we're seeing with different clients. I'd love to have you weigh in on what you're seeing.
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, Deb, I think the effect of this financial downturn is yet to be seen, the true effect of it. Based on what I'm hearing anecdotally, I haven't seen any data on this yet, but what I'm hearing anecdotally from the firms and lawyers that I'm working with is that for a lot of them, they have seen some downtick in certain practices, right? So some of the transactional practices slowed down a bit, even some of the litigation practices, particularly as courts were closed and things like that, slowed down a bit. And yet we're starting to see a bit of an uptick on those things, even just in the last month or so. Then we've had the countercyclical practices like bankruptcy and restructuring move into an uptick, as well as some of the COVID-related needs that clients have had around employment, things like that. So for a lot of our clients, a lot of what we're hearing is that they haven't really felt the top line impact of decrease in demand just yet. That being said, when I talk to some of my clients who are in longer term practices, when people are looking at intellectual property protection, when people are looking at regulatory advice and things like that, there seems to be some sense that while we haven't seen a dip in that demand just yet, that dip is coming, that there's a little bit of a lag in that dip. And so I think focusing on the top line right now is really, really important. At the worst, maybe our top line stays where it is, and then we outperform it and put some effort and time into it and skyrocket. At the best, though, maybe we protect ourselves, right? Maybe we do start to see that dip in demand, and by focusing on top line revenue generation, we can recover from that in a way that doesn't make us feel the impact of that in 6 or 12 or 18 months when it finally hits us. I think one of the things that's different about this time is that, in 2008, as you said, we cut expenses, we preserved our margin, but then over the last decade, we haven't seen any significant margin growth, notwithstanding the fact that firms have continued to raise rates every year, but we've been offering discounts, we've been seeing hits to realization and all of those kinds of things. And so I think focusing on top line revenue growth right now is smart for all of us.
Yeah, well, let's dive right into providing that perspective. And I'm just going to put the elephant, the elephant on the table or into the room, whatever that metaphor is supposed to be. We spend a lot of time at Growth Play thinking about these things. We have a really defined point of view about what we're doing. We, of course, anything that you hear today, we would love to be a partner with you and helping to think through these issues. But here's the thing, today is about giving you the tools you need so that you can start having these conversations on their own. So everything that we talk about today, we have built around the fact that you can do this regardless of the sophistication of your firm, regardless of what investments and what resources that you have right now, because we really think that this is such an important conversation, and it's so important to have it now because there's still plenty of ramp that's going on right now, and there's a lot of we just genuinely believe there's going to be a lot of opportunities in the market. And there's one thing we know is that what lawyers do remains important. It's going to be critically important to what comes next for this country. And we want you and your firms to be really well positioned to help your clients solve these problems. So that's what today is designed for. To start that conversation, we wanted to provide you with a practical overview of what when we talk about a growth strategy, what are we really talking about? One of the things that we found is that when we're talking with clients, people often confuse what is a growth plan compared to a strategic plan. And so this is very different. So what you don't see on here is things about operations, and you don't see things about innovations or pricing strategies. All of those things are critically important. And we want to talk about today, focus specifically on growth. So the simple framework, we got to think about growth from the leadership perspective. How clear is the firm's direction about where you're going? How do you know what those priorities are? And most important, how are you communicating it to the rest of your firm? So that's one part. It's really important. The second part is as we look at our teams, and typically what we're talking about there is your practice groups, your industry teams, your departments, however you're structured. Those the teams inside your organization, that is who is charged with executing on that strategic vision. So each team has to have a clear set of goals. They have to know how they're going to do it. What are the tactics that they're going to employ in order to execute on the strategic vision? And they've got to have a way to measure and manage success. And then finally, there's the individuals. If you've worked, for those of you who know Growth Play, we use the term doer seller when we talk about our business development team, because our attorneys, anybody in professional services, the big difference between us and a corporate organization is that we both do the work and we're in charge of generating those revenues. And so as we look at that doer seller workforce, we want to make sure that, number one, that we understand what strengths that you have inside your organization. We want to make sure people have the skills to do it. And we want to figure out what's motivating them and what's driving them, because we know this is a slog. We know the challenges that come with those dual responsibilities that we have as professionals. And if we don't keep people motivated, then we lose sight on. So within each category, there's those essential elements of success. Here's what our experience has been. We work with a number of firms that have a very defined, clear strategy about where they're going, why they're going to go there, why they're going there, and what the path is. We work with a number of firms that have highly experienced team functions. They're truly operating like business units. They know exactly what their goals are. They know what they're doing, and they know how they're measuring to those goals. Those things, there's lots of firms out there that have done this. And we know there's lots of firms with really great business developers inside their organization. So many firms have one of those. Many firms have two of those three important functions. But to be honest, only a handful of the firms that we're working with are doing all three of these things well. And that's important to understand. It's not about shame and blame. It's about making smart decisions about where you're going and why. And one of the things that we've all seen is, our dependency, our history of lawyers' history of relying on precedent to make decisions about the future. We tend to have if we're trying to make decisions about how to grow and what to do and what initiatives to take on, we tend to say, well, what is everybody else doing? And we tend to follow the leader. And although each of these three categories, we can tell you with a high degree of authority, you need all three of those things, very few firms are in the same place. And so doing what someone else is doing without really understanding, is that going to be best for your firm, is really putting you at a disadvantage. So this framework is an easy place just to start the conversation with your leadership team to talk about where are we on this chart? What are we doing well? And where might there be some gaps in terms of how to do that?
And Deb, one of the things that I think will be helpful to folks who are with us today and for the next 3 weeks is that this framework is also the framework that we'll use throughout the series. So today we're going to focus on that leadership strategy. How do we set direction? How do we prioritize? How do we communicate? Next week, we'll focus around teams, practice groups and industry teams. How do we set goals? How do we move into tactics? How do we measure and manage success? And then in week 3, we'll focus on the individuals. What is it that we need to do to invest in the individual business developers, and how can we put our priorities and our resources to their best use? So for those of you who are thinking about and evaluating where you are in terms of these priorities, you can sort of figure out where you want to tune in across the series and bring things back to your firm where you can make investments in the places that you're either doubling down on your strengths or looking for opportunities to increase your strengths.
Thanks. Okay, so this is the conversation starter, and all of these conversations are important. In real life, one of the pitfalls that comes with when we start to have conversations is we start to make decisions if we don't have data and if we don't have real valid insights. We start to make decisions based on assumptions, right? And we end up, facing some things, right? Number one, they're feelings and not facts. Number two, there's inherent self-interest in how we make decisions. And there are just those inherent biases that come when we're making decisions and we have our own points of view, but maybe we haven't considered the things not only that we know we don't know, but the things we don't know we don't know. And we don't have enough information to make really smart decisions. So this is if we want to start moving into, this is what a growth strategy looks like, let's talk about how do we assess our growth readiness. There's 3 things we would encourage you to look at. Number one, we want to look at your growth drivers. These are the external forces that are impacting your business. What is happening outside of the firm that's going to impact how you operate internally. And the second thing that you want to look at are your growth capabilities. These are your internal assets in terms of what's the stuff that you have internally right now to take advantage of those growth drivers. And then finally, you really want to focus on your growth culture. You want to understand what motivates people in order to get them to act and what's going to drive them. A real quick story I wanted to share with you. It's something I think as we look at how has COVID impacted and what are the big aha moments that we've had over the last few months, I think this has always been true. But for me, one of the things that I've noticed on the growth culture is that we're starting to have different, when we're doing individual business development coaching and training, we're having different conversations with people than maybe we were having 8 months or a year ago. Typically, when I do business development coaching, it's about developing business. And we start talking about what success looks like. And so developing business, success usually looks like you get business. And that comes with some sort of financial reward or something. The conversations I've been having with coaching clients over the last few months have been really different. And one of the really questions that I've been asking folks is, if you have to prioritize 3 things, how would you prioritize these 3 things? Number 1, the opportunity to do really meaningful work. However you define it, is that like your number 1 priority in your career right now? Number 2, making as much money as you can, maximizing your earning potential. And number 3, having the flexibility to have a life outside of work. Now, clearly, all 3 of those things are interrelated. But what's been really interesting is, of, let's say, 25 to 30 people I've done this informal survey with, not one person has identified maximizing their earning potential as the number 1 driver of why they grow business. And so if we're building a business development plan or a growth strategy, and it's all about that number and achieving some sort of financial metric, we're probably missing the boat in terms of really understanding our growth culture. The other thing that's been pretty interesting is that if you're going after meaningful work, or you're trying to create a practice that allows you to have a life outside of work, the money necessarily follows, because you're going to be motivated and you're going to be going after the type of things that happen. So this isn't about culture is not making a lifestyle choice or just a financial choice. It's about understanding what drives the people in your organization and what can you do to keep them energized and engaged. Taz, I'm going to shift this back over to you. The other thing that was interesting is yesterday we had this really conversation about objective metrics versus subjective observations.
Yeah, Deb, one of the things that I like to say when I was leading marketing and business development for a large firm was that I wanted my opinions to be based in fact. And I wanted our decisions to be based in fact. And I think that's really important for those of you who are leading marketing and business development efforts in your firms, regardless of what your job title or job position is. I think one of the things that we're often subject to is that we have a lot of subjective opinions coming at us, right? People like red or they like blue. They think conferences are where it's at, or they think writing and speaking is where it's at. All of those things. And one of the things that I like about the growth readiness assessment, and you're going to talk about this in a moment, is that we think about drivers, when we think about capabilities, when we think about culture, we can put really objective criteria and metrics around this so that our opinions can in fact be based in fact, as opposed to on subjective preferences or experiences of the past, or sometimes just personal biases. So this framework, this growth readiness self-assessment, thinking about what are the objective criteria around drivers, what are the objective criteria around capabilities, what are the objective criteria around culture that we need to be ready to grow, is a nice way to get us out of the land of subjective opinions and into the land of opinions based on fact.
Yeah, so let's talk about what are the data and what is the insight that's going to be most important to have more objective conversations with your team. Breaking this down into the 3 categories that we identified, there's both, again, qualitative and quantitative things that you can look at. If we start just with the growth drivers, and I think this is universally true, the easiest place and the best place and the most accurate information you're going to get in terms of what's driving growth is to talk to your existing clients. and talk to your best clients and talk to clients who engage with you in different ways and understand not just what their needs are and whether you're delivering good service, but talk to them about why you versus other firms and what are the reasons that they come to you time and time again, because that gives us, it's not just about getting the feedback and the client assessment. It's not just about creating a key account plan to grow that, to grow that particular relationship, but we can learn a lot from those existing clients in terms of how we can replicate those behaviors and what are the sales strategies that we can create based on those insights so we can find more clients that look like that. So I would say first and foremost, like that's the single best piece of information that you can get. And there's lots of ways that you can do that. And quite frankly, right now, there is no better time to be talking to your clients. And what we found is a lot of people have done a great job of reacting to what's going on in the market right now. So they did a great job of getting in touch with people and making sure they're okay. But as we move into this no man's land, people are looking for reasons to have meaningful conversations with clients. I can't think of a better one than this, to get your own attorneys out there talking to clients. The second thing from a quantitative standpoint, though, is you can also do some things looking at data inside your organization, and look at frame the numbers from the context of not just looking at what clients are hiring you to do and how much they're paying you, and not just looking at it from the vantage point of a practice team or an industry team, but looking at it from the client perspective and the different types of client relationships that you have. And there's a lot of different ways to do this, but a real simple framework for thinking about what is the different ways clients engage with you. Number one, we clearly have people who can engage in a very broad way. It's the trusted advisor. Your client calls your firm to do everything. Whatever the problem is, you solve it, and you're doing work, ideally all of their work or a substantial portion of work in 3 or multiple practice areas. 3 or more is a good starting place for thinking about that. Those are what we think of as integrated client relationships. And there's lots of the how and the why to get you to an integrated relationship is important to understand. The second type of relationship is a core relationship. Maybe you don't do everything for every client. Maybe you do one thing really well, but the client comes back to you time and time again for that same service. Revenue-wise, those clients could look exactly the same, but how they're engaging with you is different. And so how you're building that relationship, how you're growing that relationship, and also how you're finding more clients that look like that is going to be a distinct strategy. So that's a second category for client type. And then the third type are those newer relationships. Those relationships where you're making an investment in them. Perhaps they have the opportunity to become a core or an integrated relationship, or it's a new area where there's interest and that might be able to develop a new product or a service around that. So those are investment clients. Then there's kind of the fourth category, which we use the term opportunistic, but it's basically that work that we don't actually know where it comes from. We don't know why the phone has rang. It's good work. There's probably no chance to grow it in the future, but hey, like we've got capacity and we want to serve those clients. That's a really important category to understand, and to see what is that mix of work that you have and how balanced is your portfolio. So from a growth driver, I think those are really key insights to get, particularly for the firms that are focusing in that leadership bucket and are trying to think holistically about what are the greatest needs of the firm. You also want to look at your growth capabilities. So that can be, just a good gut check around what are our key markets? Where do we fit vis-a-vis our competitors? What are our services? How do we compare what's our talent profile in each of those. So that's the stuff that we are going to use to get to the growth drivers. And you also want to look at your systems and processes, both in terms of teaming and collaboration, in terms of how you deliver, both in terms of also in terms of innovation, the process that you use, pricing strategies. What are the things that you have in place? Are you able to measure and manage those things that you are doing so that you can really optimize the markets, the services, and the talent that you're investing in? And then the third we spent a little time talking about as well, already talked about, was culture. I think the best place to start is to have a listening tour and actually talk to the people inside the organization and understand their drivers and motivators. But from a quantitative standpoint, there's also a lot that you can do with data analytics and performance metrics. So performance is an objective standard, and many of you have good systems in place for evaluating performances. But what are the distinctions between a high performer and an average performer? Is there a motivational factor there? That might be one place that you want to start. There's also talent analytics that are out there. And if you've worked with Growth Play, you know that we have our own talent assessment. There's lots of assessments out there, but if you are going to use a talent assessment, one of the things that I think is interesting when you're using a predictive assessment, as it gives you a sense of some of those underlying drivers and strengths and attributes that are based on capacity rather than performance. So as we continue to talk about things like how do we, create a more inclusive environment, and how do we leverage the diversity of our firms in a better way, talent analytics give you the opportunity not only to understand what your growth profile looks like across the firm, but also to uncover potential in folks who may have not had the same opportunities to perform. So these 6 things are, if you are in a position where you have a clear sense of what can do them, and these are places where you can start. So Taz, as we wrap up today, do you want to tell us where we're going?
Yeah, so, here's what we would recommend. If you're just starting this, what we would recommend is first that you think about where you want to invest, right? Do you need to invest at the leadership and strategy level? Do you need to invest in your teams and their playbooks? Do you need to invest in your individual business developers, their skills, their motivations? That's one way to take a big picture assessment of where are we and where do we need to go. Related to that, then at the leadership and strategy level, we've given you that 3-step growth readiness assessment. So can you collect data about your growth drivers, what's happening with your clients, and where is that creating opportunity for you? Secondly, where do we have capacity within our firm? What is it that we have to sell, and how well do we have the systems and processes to sell that well? And then lastly, what is our growth culture? Are we equipped with our individual business developers to motivate them and incentivize them and give them the ability to go out there and pound the pavement the way that we know they need to. The other thing that we hope you'll do is, of course, join us for our next 2 sessions to get additional insights both on the team level as well as the individual business developer level on the specific places where you can invest on those axes.
Great. And as I mentioned, we have a wide range of folks who are on the call today. If you are one of those people who has a clear sense of where your strengths and gaps are inside the organization today and what your priorities are, if you're looking to make smart investments and how you, based on where your growth, where your assessment is, at the leadership bucket, if that's a place where, hey, you have really strong individual business developers, your teams are operating pretty strongly, but there's not that clear direction in terms of where we're going as an organization. Again, I don't think you can lose in any of this on client interviews and investing the time and the resources into collecting that data from clients. It's going to help you across everything, but it's the first place to start. The second is to actually build your growth plan and to figure out how are you going to take advantage of those growth drivers and what you're going to do in what order. And then if you do, so if you, have the information and you have a team that's all ready to go, bringing them together and creating that growth plan. Again, not a strategic plan, but a growth plan. And then the third thing would be leadership alignment. If your team you either don't feel like your management team is all on the same page, or that there's more education needed for them in terms of what strategic growth looks like, then focusing and investing some resources in leadership alignment would be a great place to start. On the teaming side, if that's the gap that you're playing, like you have great individuals, great leaders, but you're kind of in that messy middle in terms of getting your teams into action, sales plans, sales playbooks, and sales pipelines. Those are the investments that you want to make, and to start investing in your leadership and helping your practice and industry team leaders know how to use those tools to team and collaborate with the rest of the folks on the team. And then finally, if you're great on the leadership level, you're strong on the team level, but you're not executing on the front line with your individual doer sellers, you're never going to go wrong with training and development. You want to think about, do you have the sales enablement tools that you need? And finally, do your individuals have individual action plans that they know how to execute on and the confidence to execute? So those would be in terms of thinking big picture about what are the specific things you want to be doing. These are the places that we would have you start. All right, we did that in 30 minutes. This is no small feat for us.
So we're at the top of the hour, and for those of you who can stay with us, we'll stay tuned for the Pulse survey results, and we'll take your questions and try to answer them in just a moment. For those of you who are leaving us now, we'll encourage you, number one, to join us for the next 2 parts of our series next week on sales playbooks for teams, as well as on August 20th for recharging your business development team. We would encourage you to contact us if you have questions or want to talk about these issues more. We'd love to hear from you. Our contact information is on our website, or you can find it when we distributed the materials. Speaking of which, we will be distributing the materials as well as a recording of this program so that you all can see that when you want to. So that's what we have for you today. Thank you all for joining us. As we said, we'll take just a beat and then dive into the Pulse survey results in a moment. Thanks, everybody.
Great. For those who are staying on, if you have any questions and want to use the Q&A button or the chat button, that would be wonderful. We also have, you can use the raise your hand button and we can unmute you if we want to do the live conversations. So while you're thinking about whether you have any questions or not, Taz, should we just move right into the Pulse survey?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, so this is new for us, and so we have done some really quick tallying of data just based on the folks that had registered up to yesterday. But we had, I think, somewhere around 125 responses, and we asked, as you'll recall when you register, we asked 2 questions. Question number 1 was, in 2021, we're building a budget based, how are we building your budget? What are you thinking about in terms of making those decisions about how much you're going to spend? So we gave you some choices: last year's budget, defined firm priorities and benchmarks we need to meet, priorities and goals set by marketing and business development, or just kind of that generic other category. So I don't think too surprising, at least my initial reaction was most of you had selected some combination of those. So 42% of you had selected at least 2 of those categories. And what I was interested in, at least, is kind of trying to distinguish, where from a firm priority standpoint, how tightly aligned are folks with the firm priorities? How tightly is it the marketing and business development that's driving a lot of the growth thinking? And then, in my experience, and Tez, I think this might have been similar to you, there's still a lot of marketing and business development teams as we're thinking about what our budgets look like. Lots of lawyers in general, we look at last year's and we add, or we keep it flat, or we lower it to last year's, just because we don't have a good sense. So,
Deb, the thing that I was sort of buoyed by here was if you look at sort of the combination of 23% of our respondents saying that they're basing their budgets on firm priorities, and then the other 42 saying that it's a combination. My great hope is that based on our conversation today, that a lot of people have clarity at that leadership and strategic level, right? That part of what's happening is that marketing and business development teams are setting their budgets based on defined firm priorities or some combination of defined firm priorities, and then marketing and business development defined priorities, last year's budget, whatever it might be. But my hope is that what this means, and we don't know exactly, but my hope is that what this means is actually that 65% of our respondents are in some way taking firm priorities into account, which is, I think, huge progress for those of us who have been in the legal marketing profession long enough to remember when we were all trying to get our seat at the table. I think part of what this means is that we have that seat at the table, that we are in the conversations where firm priorities are being set, and that clear firm priorities are driving our budgets and what we're planning to do with our teams and with our resources and how we're supporting our firms. So I think this is good news for us.
Yeah, I think so too. And it was funny, as much as we like to say, please don't follow what other firms are doing. Look at your own situation, because your own situation is going to be unique to you. It is, I do think it is helpful to have some context when you're having conversations with leadership teams. And I agree with you. I mean, even if we isolate out that combo 42%, budgets aligned with firm priorities at 23% is I don't know, like maybe I shouldn't be blown away by that. That is larger than I would have expected it to be. And the fact that only 10% of folks are basing it on last year's budget alone, those are encouraging data to me. So I think we'll have fun. Like I said, we put this together so quick, so I think we can peel back some of the nuances of it. But I do think there's something to be said with, if we're trying to promote a holistic way of growing top line revenue, the fact that this is a trend that seems to be getting some stickiness around the way folks are going. So I was pretty encouraged by it.
Without a doubt.
All right, let's look at the second question. As compared to 2020, in 2021, we expect our investment in marketing and business development to increase, decrease, or remain the same. And again, to your point, Taz, earlier, I was very encouraged by the fact that the small, 22%, that number that we really have 78% of folks saying our budgets are going to stay the same or they're going to grow. I think that's a big shift than what we saw in 2008. What do you think?
Yeah, without a doubt. I think this is good news for us to, as we've talked about at the top of the program, our opinion is this is absolutely the right time to be continuing your investment in growth and to be continuing to look for ways to support the firm's marketing and business development efforts. So the fact that many of you are either seeing your budgets remain the same or those of you who are seeing them increase, I think that's absolutely the right thing to do, right? I get that we all have some focus, firms have to have some focus on the bottom line. And yet what we've seen in the data, especially after the 2008 financial crisis, is that those firms that continued and increased their investment in their ability to grow were the ones who came out strongest after the last financial crisis. So I think this is good news that 78% of us learned that lesson and are now keeping our investments in marketing and business development or doubling down on them. I think this is really great news.
Cool. Well, that kind of is our show and tell portion. Are there, it looks like we've got a good 45 people who stayed on. So I'm a little bit afraid to open it up to discussion broadly, but I also know that we have a lot of smart, talented people based on those 45 people that I'm looking at. And I would love if anybody is willing to share, either if you don't have any questions that you have, again, please, we can open that up and ask them. But if anybody has any perspectives, how what we talked about today is tracking with what you're seeing inside your organizations, or if you're doing other things that you would be willing to share with others, I think, this community would really benefit from it.
All right, gang. Well, hearing none, we will leave you with, please get in touch with us. We'd love to hear from you. As you all know, our Growth Play team is very committed to the success of this community and the profession as a whole. Deb, if you'll advance to the next slide, we have our contact information in the program materials. You all hopefully know where to find us on our website or at our email addresses, or you can text us and call us and all of the things that you always do. We'd love to hear from you. We love to serve as sounding boards for you, thinking partners for you, all of those kinds of things. So please do us the favor of reaching out. We'd love to hear from you. And we'd also love to see you for the next couple of weeks. We'll try to make these programs short and to the point, but hopefully practical and insightful. Thanks so much for joining us.
Awesome. Bye, everybody.
Bye, gang.